Trading our old eyes for new eyes. Obviously, they need some eyes in that situation right there. Today we have a very long scripture verse. If you haven't noticed by the 2-page bulletin today, thank you for Joan for figuring out how to do that and getting all that scripture in there. But it is a long story, but this is the lectionary. They chose this story this week. And I think it's one of my favorite gospel stories in the whole Bible. John chapter 9, verses 1 to 41. As Jesus was walking along, he saw a man who had been blind from birth. Rabbi, his disciples asked him, why was this man born blind? Was it because of his own sins or his parents' sins? It was not because of his sins or his parents' sins, Jesus answered. This happened so that the power of God could be seen in him. We must quickly carry out the tasks assigned to us by the one who sent us. The night is coming, and then no one can work. But while I'm here in the world, I am the light of the world. Then he spit in the ground and made mud with his saliva and spread the mud over the blind man's eyes. He told him, go wash yourself in the pool of Siloam. Siloam means sent. So the man went and washed and came back seeing. His neighbors and others who knew him as a blind beggar asked each other, isn't this the man who used to sit and beg? Some said he was, and others said, no, he just looks like him. But the beggar kept saying, yes, I am the same one. And they asked, who healed you? What happened? He told them, the man they called Jesus made mud and spread it over my eyes and told me, go to the pool of Siloam and wash yourself. So I went and washed, and now I can see. Where is he now? They asked. I don't know, he replied. Then they took the man who had been blind to the Pharisees because it was on the Sabbath that Jesus had made the mud and healed him. The Pharisees asked the man about it. So he told them, he put the mud over my eyes, and when I washed it away, I could see. Some of the Pharisees said, this man Jesus is not from God, for he is working on the Sabbath. Others said, but how can an ordinary sinner do such miraculous signs? So there was a deep division of opinion among them. Then the Pharisees again questioned the man who had been blind and demanded, what's your opinion about this man who healed you? And the man replied, I think he must be a prophet. The Jewish leaders still refused to believe the man who had been blind and could now see, so they called in his parents. And they asked them, is this your son? Was he born blind? If so, how can he now see? And his parents replied, we know this is our son and that he was born blind, but we don't know how he can see or who healed him. Ask him. He's old enough to speak for himself. His parents said this because they were afraid of the Jewish leaders who had announced that anyone saying Jesus was the Messiah would be expelled from the synagogue. That's why they said, he's old enough. Ask him. So for the second time, they called the man who had been blind and told him, God should get the glory for this because we know this man Jesus is a sinner. I don't know whether he is a sinner, the man replied, but I know this. I was blind, and now I can see. But what did he do, they asked. How did he heal you? Look, the man exclaimed. I told you once. Didn't you listen? Why do you want to hear it again? Do you want to become his disciples too? Then they cursed him and said, you are his disciple, but we are disciples of Moses. We know God spoke to Moses, but we don't even know where this man comes from. Why, that's very strange, the man replied. He healed my eyes, and yet you don't know where he comes from. We know that God doesn't listen to sinners, but he is ready to hear those who worship him and do his will. Ever since the world began, no one has been able to open the eyes of someone born blind. If this man were not from God, he couldn't have done it. You were born a total sinner, they answered. Are you trying to teach us? And they threw him out of the synagogue. When Jesus heard what had happened, he found the man and asked, do you believe in the Son of Man? And the man answered, who is he, sir? I want to believe in him. You have seen him, Jesus said. He is speaking to you. Yes, Lord, I believe, the man said. And he worshiped Jesus. And then Jesus told him, I entered this world to render judgment, to give sight to the blind, and to show those who think they see that they are blind. Some Pharisees who were standing nearby heard him and asked, are you saying we're blind? If you were blind, you wouldn't be guilty, Jesus replied. But you remain guilty because you claim you can see. Yeah, what a text, huh? I mean, this is like, the Bible is normally so short in its descriptions, but this actually gives detail of a situation that happened. And you know, one thing, I get the feeling of a fight here. A fight, you know, and I hate fights, to be honest with you. They make me cringe. I just want everybody to be happy and get along and hug and all that stuff. You know, that's kind of what I want. You know, but sometimes that just isn't an option. So fights happen in this world, and they seem to happen all the time. Big fights, wars, and small fights between individuals. And it takes me back oftentimes to being back in grade school. I mean, grade school and like middle school or junior high, when fights used to happen after school. Anybody remember the fights that used to happen in school, after school? Yeah, you remember those fights? They were interesting, to say the least. And I remember one particular fight. I don't know why they stick out in my mind. This is like how many years ago? Like 40 years ago or more in my life. There was this kid named Billy Waters and Rob Lanza. This is in 5th grade. And I remember this like it was yesterday. Yeah, so Billy Waters, he was kind of a troubled kid. He's getting in trouble all the time. Call him a problem child or whatever you want to call him. But he's always in people's, you know, on their bad side. And Rob Lanza apparently had some beef with him. I don't know what Billy did to Rob, but Rob was not happy with Billy. So Rob said, Billy, I'm going to meet you up in the path behind the school where we all went to go home because we walked home. I'm going to meet you up there and we're going to fight. So he met him up there, and this crowd is gathering around, and these 5th graders are throwing punches and all this stuff, and things are happening, and Rob beat the tar out of Billy, and he did. And I just remember feeling like, you know, there's this euphoria that happens around a fight, like everyone gets all like, ugh, like all like adrenalized and stuff. But I feel that, but also at the same time, I just feel like awful. Like, oh, why do we have to hurt each other so much? But sometimes fights can be good. Sometimes they can be right. I think Jesus is picking a fight in this text today. And it's a good fight. Because he's fighting in the right way. And he's fighting the right people. He's fighting those who refuse to open up their minds and their hearts. And he's fighting those people who are fighting back against the people who actually are believing and getting set free. That's why I love this story. It's so full and rich. And let's take a look again at verse 1. Pull up verse 1 there and take a look on your sheet if you want to. As Jesus was walking along, he saw a man who'd been blind from birth. Verse 2, Rabbi, his disciples asked him, why was this man born blind? Was it because of his own sins or his parents' sins? So the theme of the story is introduced. The theme of the story is who can really see and who can really not see. Who can see and who can't see. And the disciples start out with a very relevant question in their day and age. You know, why is this man blind? Did he sin or did his parents sin? It was a very firm belief in their culture that the ills of the world, the suffering of the world was caused by sin. So if you had some sort of disease, it was caused by sin in your life. If you were born with a disease, like say blindness, it was because your parents had sinned. And therefore they passed that sin along to you, and you were born blind because of their sin. This was the worldview that they had, the religious view that they had. So their question was very, very pertinent and very relevant to that day and age. You know, why is this man blind? Who sinned to make him blind? The religious leaders would obviously say that his parents sinned because he was born blind. So therefore, it must have been his parents. So he couldn't be responsible for being blind. I mean, this is just how the Jewish people thought. You know, I mean, we can even see this in our day a little bit. You know, when the difficult news comes through in a pregnancy that, you know, when a child is born with some sort of complication, a lot of times parents will say, you know, what did we do to deserve this? It's still the same kind of complicated, it's the same kind of feeling that we have, like we did something to deserve such punishment, you know. And well, of course, the obvious answer is nothing. That's not really how it works. But it doesn't stop us from being human and thinking that way anyway. So the disciples They probably expected Jesus, when they asked him the question, to say that, well, of course, it was the sins of his parents that caused this man to be blind. But in true Jesus fashion, he turns the table upside down, much like he did in the temple when he actually flipped the tables over. But he turns the table of the conversation here upside down, and his answer is provocative, to say the least. He bucks against the prevailing theory of religious leaders. He just goes right headfirst into it. They would have easily condemned the blind man's parents as the cause, but Jesus says something very other than that. He just doesn't even go anywhere near there. He goes to verse 3. He says, it was not because of his sins or his parents' sins, Jesus answered. This happened so the power of God could be seen in him. I say, what? What? What are we talking about, Jesus? I mean, am I getting you straight here, Jesus? He's blind so that God can show his power by healing him? I go, that's strange. It sounds like the reason why people have ailments is so that God can accomplish his purpose in this world, which means that God created the ailments and caused the people to be ill or sick or disabled, which means that God made this man blind, which becomes problematic in my mind. Very problematic. How could I say that God did this? I mean, a loving God who is caring and always has our best interest in mind, makes people blind? Well, if you go through the Bible, you could make an argument from the Bible that God causes suffering in people's lives. You really could make an argument from it. I'm not saying that the Bible exclusively says that. I'm just saying that there are verses in the Bible that really strongly say and suggest that God causes suffering in people's lives. But I want to be honest with you, I don't like that argument at all. I don't like it. And then he asked the question, well, do I get to choose? Do I get to choose how God really is and what God really does? No, I don't. But I just think in reading the whole Bible, I think it just doesn't fit the nature of God. It doesn't fit the nature of who God is, that God would cause these things to happen. Like a loving God, as loving as God is, causes ailments in people, and that a loving God could cause a child to have cancer. I cannot get my arms around that and say, yes, that's true, because I just can't see this being true. So there's got to be another explanation from it. It just doesn't make any sense. So what I do in this situation is I just chalk up this notion to the worldview of the ancient people, and say, and this is how they viewed life, and this is how they viewed how the world worked, and they viewed life in a very deterministic predestination kind of a way, like everything is set in stone beforehand, like all the things that happen in life are caused by God, and that everything happens for God's reasons and purposes. This was their kind of way of seeing the world and how the world worked. So for them to think this way would be a natural way for them to think. I personally would be much more comfortable if the text here said that God's power can be seen through this man by God healing his blindness. This man is blind, and God's power can be seen through this man's blindness being healed. I think that's a much better way to look at it. But again, I'm not the writer of the Bible. I'm just trying my best to interpret it in a way that makes the most sense when you look at the whole character of God. But in the end, I don't really know. And do you know when we'll know, though? When we go to heaven and we can ask these specific questions. So moving on from that little strange statement and leaving that as kind of an anomaly, Jesus and subsequently his disciples, they were convinced that the end was upon them and that the end was coming imminently. Verse 4. There's the urgency in the statements here that he's making. Verse 4, we must quickly carry out the tasks assigned to us by the one who sent us. The night is coming, and then no one can work. But while I'm here in the world, I am the light of the world. So here it's full of symbolism here, and easy symbolism. The night is darkness, and the light is like the noontime light. And we kind of continuing this theme from last week. Remember the last week's text where Nicodemus came and visited Jesus in the night, and he didn't understand, he didn't see the light of God's truth. But the woman at the well interacted with Jesus in the bright noontime daylight, and she could see the light of Christ in her heart. So we're having this same motif reiterated here in this story that we're learning about today. And so, in order to again show the upside down reality of God's truth, Jesus picks a fight with the religious leaders. He's going to show something here. He's going to show how there are some who are in darkness and there are some who are in the light. And the ones that are in the light are not the ones that you would expect to be there. And the ones that are in the darkness are also not the ones that you would expect to be there. So here this man is. He's blind. Verse 6. Jesus spit on the ground and made mud with his saliva, it's gross, and spread the mud over the blind man's eyes. Verse 7, he told him, "Go wash yourself in the pool of Siloam." It's odd. I admit, it's odd. Isn't it odd? It's strange, but, it's harmless. No harm done. It certainly doesn't seem, like fighting actions here that Jesus is doing, at least yet. But the kicker, and here's the fight, right? Here is the fight introduced, the words that instigate the battle. This is all being done on the Sabbath. Dun, 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 the Sabbath, right? No work is to be done on the Sabbath day, according to Jewish law. And making a tablespoon of mud with spit and dirt is obviously work, is it not? That's some hard work right there. Hard work. Well, it is work according to the religious authorities. It doesn't seem like a whole lot of work to me. But the rules that the religious leaders had for keeping the Sabbath holy involved extensive descriptions of what people cannot do in order to observe the Sabbath day rest, as God commanded the Sabbath to be a day of rest. But then the Jewish leaders interpreted that command in a myriad of different ways. And now, making spittle mud is considered to be a horrible sin and working on the Sabbath and disobeying God's commandment. So, did God ever describe, in the Bible, in the book of Exodus, when he gave Moses the law, did he describe, "Thou shalt not make spittle mud on the Sabbath day and spread it on someone's eyes and make them healed"? No, this is the religious leader's interpretation, an extreme interpretation of that law, by the way. These kind of rules were created by the leaders. And Jesus thought these rules were ridiculous. He thought they were absurd. And obviously they are. And further, he viewed someone's well-being as way more important than jumping through the Sabbath hoops in order to keep the Sabbath holy. Jesus could have said the word and healed the man. Could he have not have? He could have just said, "Be healed." And the man would have received sight, and all would have been fine, and everyone would have been like, wow. But he chose to do something else. Chose to pick a fight. Chose to get under the skin of the religious leaders instead, because he wanted to prove a point to them. And the point is, very similar to last week, people are not cursed by God at birth or because of their parents' sins or their own sins or anything like that. People are favored. This is Jesus' point. People are favored or cursed based on their faith. Based on their faith. And specifically, Jesus is pointing out their faith in the Son of Man, who is Jesus. Who is really blind here? The physically blind man, or the leaders that think they can see the truth, but really can't? They're blind to the truth. Jesus shows that those who are open to him are the ones that see. Verse 7. Go wash yourself in the pool of Siloam. So the man went and washed, and he came back seeing. He came back seeing physically, but symbolically, we're talking about seeing spiritually here. The two are tied together in this story. But those who are closed off and reject Jesus are actually the ones that are blind. They are, in turn, rejecting God and condemning themselves by their own choice to reject God. They're condemning themselves to judgment. Verse 39. Verse 39. Then Jesus told them, I entered this world to render judgment, to give sight to the blind, and to show those who think they see that they are blind. And some Pharisees, this is at the end of the story, some Pharisees who were standing nearby heard and said, are you saying we're blind? And he comes out with this wonderful statement at 41. If you were blind, you wouldn't be guilty. But you remain guilty because you claim you can see. This story is so great. It's so great for so many different reasons. And one of the reasons why this story is great in my mind is because of its humor. It's funny. It has humor in it. You know, the people that knew this blind man, they were astonished that he could now see. And dare I say, they were even in disbelief that he could now see. So they rejoiced. So they saw that he could see, and then they rejoiced in Jesus and believed in him and gave their hearts to him, right? No, they didn't. They didn't do that at all. What do? They hauled him off to the religious leaders. They hauled him off. This guy can see now. There was work done on the Sabbath. Let's get him into the religious leaders and sort this out. You know, they were snitching on him because Jesus worked on the Sabbath by making a mud out of his spit and some dust. And this is where it gets very humorous, okay? The Pharisees start grilling him in their typical kangaroo court style, okay? So they're grilling him. How did you get healed? They said. I mean, you could just see them getting all like feisty. Who did this? And some of the Pharisees were ticked off because this all happened on the Sabbath, which would discount Jesus' credibility entirely, because only a sinner would work on the Sabbath, you see. Forget about healing the man. It doesn't matter. Only a sinner would make spittle mud on a Sabbath. You know, as if making spit mud, you should have any consequence. Well, other Pharisees thought that, you know, how could a sinner heal the man and do such a miracle? So they argued back and forth in typical Pharisee style. And then, and this is the funny part, and then they ask the formerly blind man's opinion. Here are these like ultra-learned, the peak of society, who would look so far down on this man as the absolute bottom of the earth. And then they ask him. They ask the man's opinion, verse 17. The Pharisees again questioned the man who had been blind and demanded, what's your opinion about this man who healed you? They're asking this man's opinion, which is hilarious. They are so confounded that they ask this blind beggar's opinion as to who Jesus is. They are the spiritual leaders of the nation, and they are consulting with a man considered by them to be absolutely cursed by God. They're consulting with him as to who this Jesus is. The irony is very intentional here. It's there to show how spiritually impoverished and handicapped they truly, truly are. And how this poor, handicapped person who is supposedly cursed by God actually sees the truth so easily, just like he can see everything around him just by opening his eyes now. Verse 17 again. The last part of it there. The man replies, I think he must be a prophet. Whoa, a prophet. Like Moses and Elijah prophet? And these are big people. And the Pharisees are like, I don't think so. There's no way. There must be some mistake here. We can't be the ignorant ones in this situation, the Pharisees would say. We can't be the ones that are dumb here. This is the blind man. We can't be beneath him. It has to be this man who is lying. It cannot be our own inability to see things correctly. He was probably never blind in the first place, they thought. This whole thing is a hoax. Whole thing is a big trick because it can't be us. It's got to be them. It's got to be him. You see, their blindness is so deep. So, so they call it his parents. They drag his parents in, like, the parents being called by the school principal. Your son's a problem child. They're having fights up there on the top of the hill there on the path. Come on in, we got to talk to the principal here. Your son's in trouble. They ask him, is this your son? Yes. Was he born blind? Yes. Well, then how can he now see? What a dumb question. How can he now see? Does he expect his parents to be able to answer this? Yeah. Again, the Pharisees are the ones who can't see. And the parents are like, whoa, hold on. He's a big boy now. He can answer for himself, can't he? In other words, we're not going to get caught up in another mess that he has made in this world. We're pleading the fifth here. And after all, we like our nice pew in the synagogue, and we don't want to get kicked out because of Jesus or our son or anything. So go ask him. We don't want any part of this. It's an absolute dead end for the Pharisees. So they haul the formerly blind man back in. This is sounding like an episode of the Three Stooges at this point. It really is. So Moe, Larry, and Curly start back in on this formerly blind man. Jesus couldn't have done this because he is a sinner. And the man said, I don't know whether he's a sinner or not. All I know is that I can now see. Verse 27. Look, the man explained, I told you once. And this is a blind beggar talking to the religious ultra elite. I mean, these people are like the highest of the high in society, higher than a president or anything like that would be. And here's a blind beggar. I told you once. Didn't you listen? Why do you want to hear it again? Do you want to become his disciples too? Oh my gosh, it's so good. The Pharisees are like, but what did he do? How did he do this? And again, those who can see are asking those who supposedly can't see. And it's here that the man gets exasperated. He gets frustrated. And the snarkiness of his answer is an absolute thing of beauty. Do you want to become his disciples too? Oh, I love it. And can you blame him? The greatest thing in his life just happened to him moments before. And these people are more concerned with a little handful of mud than a pair of blind eyes that can now see. And it gets better. It gets even better. The big guys here, the Three Stooges, don't like his sassy behavior. They don't like it at all. So they get their full know-it-all high and mighty going, right? And then verse 28. Verse 28, they cursed him and said, you are his disciple, but we are disciples of Moses. You are way over there. We know God spoke to Moses, verse 29. But we don't even know where this man comes from. In other words, you are cursed by God, they're saying to this man. And we obviously are not. We follow Moses. We know. You do not know. You're pathetic, is what they're saying. And here is the best comeback of all. So perfect. Verse 30. It is so perfect. Here's this blind beggar from his entire life. Why, that's very strange, the man replied. He healed my eyes, and yet you don't know where he came from. Absolutely calling them completely incompetent, which they were. Here they are, getting completely floored by a blind beggar who actually can see the truth. I love this story. It is so good. Cursed, a man supposedly cursed by God, schooling the highest of the religious elites. And of course, This is Jesus' point all along. This is exactly the point that Jesus was trying to make. And it's so interesting here because Jesus picked the fight. Remember? He started this whole thing. And this man fought the fight masterfully. Beyond masterfully. Better than Mike Tyson giving one of those, knockout in what he used to beat people in a minute into the first round. Mike Tyson, back when he was fighting. Boom, gone. 2 minutes in the boxing match, they're down, knockout, over. That's very strange. You don't know where he comes from. For this blind guy, formerly blind guy, it's pure and simple logic. And the formerly blind guy gets it. He traded his old eyes for new eyes that could see. But not just physical eyes, spiritual eyes. He traded his old spiritual eyes of cursed and nothing for new spiritual eyes that could see God's blessing and care for him. But not the Pharisees. They should be wicked smart, but they're so dull they don't get it. Verse 33. Obviously, if this man were not from God, he couldn't have done it. But the Pharisees chose to keep their old eyes. And they are over the top, very mad. No one likes to have their wrongs pointed out, do they? Who likes to have their wrongs pointed out? Nobody does. So what do the great religious leaders do when they have their wrongs pointed out? What do they always do? The great leaders of the world, they get very mad, right? So what do these leaders do? They kick them out, of course. They just kick them out. You can't see the forest for the trees. It's so simple they can't even see it. So simple. But then part of the point of this story is that we need to see ourselves in the place of those religious leaders. Do we have new eyes? Do we have new eyes? Have we traded in our old eyes for new eyes? So Jesus finds the healed man. He gives him a high five and a fist bump and all that. In verse 35, when Jesus heard that what had happened, he found the man and asked, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" The man answered, "Who is he, sir? I want to believe in him." "You have seen him," Jesus said, "and he's speaking to you." 38, "Yes, Lord, I believe." And the man said, and he worshiped Jesus. So simple, yet so incomprehensible to those who cannot see. So close, but the Pharisees might well have been 1,000,000 miles away or on a different planet because they just couldn't get it. They refused to take on those new eyes. Jesus called it in again, verse 39, "I entered the world to render judgment, to give sight to the blind, and to show those who think they see that they are blind." I will say, I'm going to end with this. God has a new set of eyes for you. Do we see Jesus as our Lord and Savior, or do we refuse to see it? He can be those things to us. He can be Lord and Savior. He wants to be those things to us. He seeks us out. He sought out that formerly blind man, and he asks us if we too believe in him. And if we know the one who is speaking to us is he. And my question is to us, do we really know that in our lives? Do you really know it deep in your heart? And if you want to know it, then pray to him for the gift of new eyes. For it is the gift that he is more than willing and eager to give you. Could you stand with me for our final hymn today?